They called him the cowboy who never smiles. Ethan Cole lived alone, spoke to no one, and liked it that way. Then a storm changed everything. Through the pouring rain, he heard something impossible. Laughter. Pure, joyful laughter. He found her spinning in circles, face turned to the sky as if the thunder was music. Her wagon was broken. She was stranded. Every instinct screamed at him to ride away, but he didn't. "You don't seem dangerous," she told him that night. "Just very, very sad." No one had ever seen through his walls like that. No one had ever tried. But her powerful uncle had other plans. He knew Ethan's darkest secret, and he would do anything to keep them apart. "That man is broken goods," her uncle warned. "His temper will destroy you." Now she must choose. Her family's protection, or the wounded cowboy who finally made her want to stay. Can a woman who dances in storms teach a man who forgot how to feel, to love again? What you'll learn. The walls we build to protect ourselves also keep out the very love that could heal us. The meaning. You are not defined by your worst moment. Everyone deserves someone who sees their scars and chooses to stay anyway. If you believe broken hearts can learn to beat again, hit subscribe and join our family. Tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who saw the real you behind your walls? And if this story touches your soul, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. The sky over the canyon was a deep, angry purple. Ethan had seen his share of storms in 32 years, but this one felt mean. The air was thick, making his horse, Ash, skittish. Ethan, however, stopped caring about shelter a long time ago. He was riding back from Bellwater, 7 miles still to go to his rundown cabin. The only reason he went to town was to sell 3 horses, and the coin in his saddlebag was the only company he wanted. The rain started coming down in sheets so heavy he could barely see 10 feet in front of him. That's when he heard it, laughter. Not a nervous chuckle, but pure, bright joy cutting right through the thunder. Ethan pulled Ash to a halt, listening. It was real, all right, coming from a clearing up ahead. Every instinct told him to ride on, that other people's trouble was a plague to be avoided. But something made him nudge Ash forward. Through the downpour, he saw a busted wagon, one wheel splintered like bone. And next to it, a woman was spinning in circles, her face turned up to the sky, laughing. She looked to be in her mid-20s, her dress soaked through and her hair hanging in wet ropes down her back. Ethan just sat there on his horse, stunned. He'd seen folks go mad from loneliness out here, but he'd never seen anyone find such joy in chaos. The woman stopped her spinning and finally saw him. Her smile was so bright it could have lit up the dark sky. "Isn't it magnificent?" she hollered over the roar of the storm. Ethan just stared. Magnificent? This woman was crazy. "Your wheel's broken," he grunted, the only words he could find. "I know," she laughed. "Right in the middle of nowhere. What are the odds?" He tightened his jaw. "You need help." She tilted her head. "I suppose I do. But when's the last time you just felt a storm, really felt it?" "You're going to get yourself struck by lightning," Ethan said flatly. "Well, we all die sometime," she answered, cheerful as can be. "Might as well enjoy the rain." Ethan was speechless. Everything in him screamed to ride away and leave this foolish woman to her fate. Instead, he heard his own voice say, "There's a cabin about 7 miles north. You can wait out the storm there." Her smile got even brighter. "That's mighty kind of you, Mr. Ethan Cole." "Well, Mr. Ethan Cole, I'm Leah Monroe. I accept." She pointed to her horse. "But my wagon's not going anywhere." "Leave it," Ethan said, already dismounting. He couldn't believe what he was doing. He didn't get involved. But there he was, unhitching her horse and grabbing her things from the wagon. "You traveling alone?" he asked. "Was supposed to meet someone in Bellwater," she said, coming to stand beside him. Up close, her eyes were the color of new spring grass. "You don't seem all that dangerous, Mr. Cole," she said softly. "Just sad." The word hit him like a punch. He turned away quick, tying her trunk to his saddle. "I'm not anything," he said, his voice rough. "Now get on your horse before we lose the light." Laya moved to her mare, and Ethan, before he could think twice, cupped his hands to give her a boost up. She was light as a feather, and her hand rested on his shoulder for just a second. He felt the warmth of it right through his soaked coat. Then he stepped back fast. "This way," he mumbled, swinging onto Ash. "Stay close." They rode on into the growing dark, Ethan leading the way. And with every step his horse took, he wondered what in the Sam Hill he had just done, bringing a storm-dancing stranger back to the one place on Earth that was supposed to be his. The narrow trail gave them no shelter from the rain. Ethan had to get off and lead his horse Ash through the slick rocks. Laya followed without a word of complaint, her boots sinking in the mud. He glanced back once and saw her face turned up to the sky, a peaceful look on her face as the rain fell. 2 hours later, her horse stumbled. He turned Ash in a heartbeat, reaching out to steady her mare. "You all right?" he asked. "Fine," she said, but her voice was tight. In the dim light, he could see she was shivering, her earlier joy replaced by simple grit. A knot of guilt tightened in his stomach. He should have just left her to her own foolish choices. "Not much farther," he promised. Just then, the cabin appeared through the downpour. It was not much to look at, just a one-room shack, but it was solid. And right now, that was all that mattered. When Laya's feet hit the ground, her legs nearly gave out. Ethan caught her. "This is home," she whispered, looking at the cabin. "It's shelter," he corrected. A man like him did not have a home. He tended to the horses first, stripping their wet gear and rubbing them down in the lean-to. Laya stood in the doorway watching him. "You are good with them," she said. He grunted. "Horses make more sense than people. They do not lie." "That sounds lonely," she replied softly. He did not answer, just grabbed her things and pointed to the door. "Get inside before you freeze." The cabin was dark and cold. He lit an oil lamp by memory, and the small light showed his world for what it was. A table, 2 chairs, a bed, and a few shelves. No pictures. Nothing personal. Laya looked around, and he braced for her reaction. "It's honest," she said. "It is empty," he fired back, starting a fire in the old stove. "You should change," he said, his back to her. "There is a blanket on the bed." "Just turn around," Laya replied. "I will be quick." He faced the wall, listening to the rustle of wet clothes. He tried to focus on the sound of the rain and the fire crackling to life. "All right," she said. He turned to see her wrapped in his blanket, her damp dress hanging near the stove. Without the heavy fabric, she looked younger. "Your turn," she said, a hint of steel in her voice. "You are dripping on your own floor. Change before you catch your death." The simple concern caught him off guard. He changed quickly, his back to her. When he faced her again, she was studying the few books on his shelf. "You read," she stated. "What about? Does it matter?" "It does," she smiled. "What a person reads says something about who they are." "I read whatever I can get," he said. "I do not believe you." "Are you calling me a liar?" he asked. "I am saying you are more careful than you let on." He sighed, pouring water for coffee with too much force. "They are about horses," he finally admitted. "Training, breeding, nothing about people." Laya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I love storms." The change of subject startled him. "My mother hated them," she explained, her voice going soft. "She would close every curtain and sit in the middle of the room, trembling. As a little girl, that was the most terrifying thing in the world, seeing my mother so afraid." He turned to watch her face in the lamplight as she continued. "When I was 12, my mother died. Not from a storm, but from a sickness that took her in just 3 days. After, a huge thunderstorm rolled in. I sat in that same room waiting to be scared, but I was not. I was just angry. Angry she had spent her life fearing something that could not hurt her. The real danger," Laya said, "the sickness, had been inside her all along. So I walked out into that storm and screamed. When I was done, I started laughing. The storm did not care. It was just being what it was. "And that is why you dance in the rain," Ethan said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "That is why," she agreed. "Life is too short, Mr. Cole. Too short to hide from the thunder." The coffee pot began to hiss. He poured 2 cups and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, and he pulled away like he had been shocked. They sat in silence, the warmth of the fire pushing back the cold. After a while, Leia asked, "Why do they call you the cowboy who never smiles?" His jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "The man at the store in Bellwater," she said. "Is it true?" Ethan stared down into his cup. "I do not see much in this world worth smiling about." Have you ever met someone so beaten down they just gave up? That was Ethan Cole, a man hiding from a past that stole his trust in people. This story is about how a simple act of kindness can change everything. So stick around to see why you can never judge a man by the walls he builds. Leia looked at him straight. "Mr. Cole, what happened to you?" A hot flash of anger shot through him. "You don't know a thing about me. I know this cabin has no pictures, no memories. I know you helped a stranger you clearly wanted to ignore. And when I said you were sad, you didn't say I was wrong." He stood up fast, his chair scraping the floor. "You ought to learn to mind your own business." But Leia didn't get mad. She just looked at him with those steady green eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "You're right. I push too hard sometimes." Her apology caught him completely off guard. He ran a hand through his hair. "You take the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." After some arguing, she finally agreed, but only if he took the extra quilts. As the storm howled outside, her soft voice cut through the dark. "Thank you for not leaving me out there." Ethan just closed his eyes. "Go to sleep, Miss Monroe." "Leia," she whispered. "Please, call me Leia." He waited a beat. "Go to sleep, Leia." He thought she was finally asleep when she spoke again, so quiet he almost missed it. "Good night, Ethan." Hearing his name from her felt like a crack forming in a wall he'd built around his heart. He didn't answer, just laid there on the hard floor, his empty cabin suddenly feeling a little less lonely. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and someone humming. For a second, he forgot where he was. Then he remembered the storm and the woman now breathing in his bed. He sat up, his back aching, and saw Leia moving around his kitchen like she belonged there. Her hair was braided, and she was somehow making a real breakfast from his sorry supplies. "You're awake," she said with a bright smile. "I found some eggs and bacon. Figured it was the least I could do after you saved me." Ethan just stood and started folding his quilts. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said, cracking an egg perfectly into the pan. "Besides," she added, "my aunt always said I made the best scrambled eggs in 3 counties. After washing his face, Ethan caught his reflection in the small mirror. He looked rough. Behind him, he could see Leia, completely at ease in his space. It felt strange, like watching a scene from someone else's life. "How do you like your eggs?" she asked. "Don't care." "Everyone cares," she replied gently, sliding a plate onto the table. "I made them soft." "There won't be a next time," he said, the words coming out colder than he meant. "The storm's passed. You can get to Bellwater today." A flicker of hurt crossed her face before she hid it with a smile. "Of course. I've taken up enough of your time." They ate without a word. The eggs were delicious, but they tasted like ash in his mouth. After breakfast, he saddled her horse while she gathered her things. "Just follow this trail about 8 miles south," he pointed. "You'll see the church steeple first." "Thank you again for everything," she said, mounting her horse. "It's fine, just be careful." He cut her off, unable to stand her kindness. She looked at him for a long moment. "Goodbye, Ethan Cole." I hope you find a reason to smile someday." He watched her ride away until she was gone. Then he just stood there, letting the heavy silence of his life settle back in. The next 3 days were a blur of chores. He told himself he was glad for the quiet, glad to be alone. He was lying. The cabin felt colder and emptier than ever before. On the 4th day, he rode into Bellwater for supplies, telling himself he wasn't looking for her. But his eyes searched every street, and his ears listened for her laugh. He was just trying to conduct his business and leave, same as always. But then he heard a familiar voice call his name, and his heart nearly stopped. "That girl you rescued in the storm is safe," Davies, the store owner, announced as Ethan loaded his saddlebags. "She's over at the Monroe Ranch, about 15 miles east of here." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. He had a dark history with James Monroe, a powerful and unforgiving man. It was a history that ended with threats Ethan could still hear plain as day 3 years later. Davies added, her uncle wasn't too pleased to hear she spent the night in a stranger's cabin. Ethan swung onto his horse, determined to stay clear of whatever trouble was brewing. Leah was with her kin far from him, and that was for the best. But as he turned to leave, Davies called out, "Monroe asked where to find your cabin. I told him." Ethan rode out of town with his jaw set, wondering just how much time he had before the past came knocking on his door. For 2 weeks, Ethan buried himself in his work, trying to force the woman with the easy laugh from his mind. He had no intention of going to the harvest dance, but a trip to Bellwater for supplies put him right in the middle of the town's celebration. He was about to head home when a wagon pulled up, and his heart stopped. It was Leah. Her hair was pinned up proper, and she wore a blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. She was laughing with her aunt, and the sound of it made Ethan's chest ache. He tried to ride off before she noticed him, but he was not quick enough. "Ethan," she called, her voice bright with a pleasure that shook him to his core. He knew he should have kept riding, but he found himself turning back as Leah hurried toward him. "I can't believe it's you," she said. "I truly wanted to thank you again." His reply was gruff. "You would have managed on your own." Her smile wavered, but she pressed on. "Will you come to the dance tonight? I would love to see you there." He gave her a flat no. "Why not?" she asked, her gaze steady. "Because I don't," was all he would say. As her aunt called her away, Leah reached out and her fingers brushed against his boot for just a moment, a touch that stopped his breath. "I know you like being alone," she said softly. "But sometimes the things we think we want are not the things we actually need." She let her hand fall. "The dance starts at sunset. If you change your mind, I will save you a piece of apple pie." And with that, she walked away. Ethan rode home feeling like a caged animal. He sat on his porch watching the sky bleed into purple and gold, imagining Leah in her blue dress, dancing with some other man. He told himself she was just a stranger he had helped, but he could not recall the last time someone had looked at him as if he were a man worth knowing. The thought chewed at him until he stood up abruptly. "To heck with it," he muttered. 20 minutes later, he was riding back to Bellwater, cleaned up and feeling like a complete fool. The town square was alive with lanterns, music, and laughter. Facing down storms was easy. This terrified him. He was 3 steps from turning back when he heard her voice call his name. "You came." Leah stood in the doorway of the hall, glowing in the lantern light. She was smiling at him like he was the only person there. "I told you I'd save you some pie," she said, linking her arm through his with a surprising boldness. "Come on. Everyone here is friendly, I promise." Ethan let Leah lead him into the crowded town hall. He could feel people staring. He knew most of these folks by sight, but had never spoken to them. "Leah, dear," a small woman with Leah's warm smile appeared. "I see you brought your hermit friend." "Aunt Clara, this is Ethan Cole." His gut clenched, expecting the cold shoulder all Monroe's gave him. But Clara just beamed. "The man from the storm. Leah told me how kind you were. Thank you for taking care of her." "It was nothing," Ethan mumbled. It was everything, Leia said softly. Before he could respond, a heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. Ethan turned and found himself looking into the cold, calculating eyes of a man he never wanted to see again. "Ethan Cole," James Monroe said, his voice slick with fake cheer. "Been a long time." "Mr. Monroe," Ethan replied, his own voice flat as a tabletop. "I hear you met my niece," James said, his grip tightening just enough to be a threat. Leia jumped in. "He saved my life, Uncle James." "Yes," Monroe's smile never touched his eyes. "I heard all about the shelter he offered." "Well now, Cole, mighty kind of you to take in a lone young woman at your cabin all night." The threat hung in the air. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your niece was in trouble. I helped her. That is all." "Is it now?" Monroe's eyes cut over to Leia. "Looks to me like you saw a chance and you took it." "Uncle James, that is not true," Leia said, her face white as a sheet. "Ethan was a perfect gentleman. I do not take the word of a naive girl. You do not understand men like him. Men with reputations. Men run out of other towns." The dance hall got quiet, all eyes on them. Monroe brought up the incident from 3 years ago. "You nearly put a man in his grave over a horse. He was beating that poor animal to death. I stopped him. You brutalized him, Ethan. There is a big difference." And Ethan knew deep down every single word was true. "Uncle James, please stop." Leia's voice trembled. "Ethan helped me." "What matters," Monroe said, his eyes locked on Ethan, "is protecting you. Associating with a man like this is a mistake." "I reckon Leia can decide for herself," Ethan said, his voice low. "Not while she lives under my roof. Her choices reflect on me, and I will not have my family's name dragged through the mud." The word struck Ethan like a physical blow. The old feeling of worthlessness washed over him. "You are right," he said, his voice hollow. He looked at Leia's heartbroken face and turned to leave. He heard her call his name, but he could not stop. Monroe was right. He was trouble, the kind of man a good woman should run from. He was untying his horse, Ash, when she ran up to him. "Do not let him run you off," she pleaded. "He is not. He is just telling the truth." "But everything he said about me is true, Leia. I have a temper I cannot always control. You should stay away from me. I do not believe you are a bad man. Then you are a fool." He grabbed the reins. "Go on back to the dance. Find a man worth your time." "What if I think you are worth my time?" The question hit him square in the chest. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because I saw the real you in that cabin. I saw the books you read and how gentle you were with your animals. You gave me your own bed. I saw the man behind the wall you have built, and I liked him. You are not a bad man, Ethan. You are a hurt one." Her words left him speechless. Before he could think, Monroe's voice boomed from the doorway. "Leia, get inside now. Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, ignoring her uncle. "Meet me at the creek on the east side of our property. Noon." "Leia," I said now, her uncle warned. "I have to go," she said to Ethan. "But I will be there. I hope you come." She gave his boot a final squeeze and walked back with her head held high. Ethan watched Monroe put a hand on her shoulder and guide her inside, and something inside him just broke. He rode home under the stars, his mind a mess. The next morning he found himself by the creek, well before noon, pacing like a caged animal. He should not have come. This was a mistake that would only lead to heartache. But just as the sun hit its peak, he heard a horse approaching. It was Leia, her face breaking into a beautiful smile when she saw him. "You came," she said, sliding off her horse. "I was not sure you would." "Neither was I," he admitted, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm glad you did. I need to apologize for my uncle. He was just protecting you," Ethan said, trying to let her off the hook. "He was being cruel," Leia insisted, her expression firm. "He had no right to use your past against you like that. Everything he said was the truth. Truth can be a weapon, Ethan, and he was using it to hurt you." She stepped closer, her green eyes searching his. "Will you tell me what really happened 3 years ago? I want to understand, not to judge." Ethan looked away at the rushing water, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. His name was Garrett. He had just bought a new horse from a rancher a couple of towns over. He paid good money for him. I saw Garrett in town with a beautiful young stallion, but he wasn't interested in its spirit. He wanted to break it. When the horse resisted, he just started beating it with pure, ugly cruelty. I was just passing through and saw the whole thing. The horse was screaming and Garrett was laughing. I told him to stop. He told me to mind my own business, so I made it my business. I pulled him off that horse and I beat him. Broke his jaw and a few ribs. It took 4 men to pull me off him. Leia looked at me, not with horror, but with a thoughtful expression. "What happened to the horse?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. I bought it from him afterwards and nursed it back to health. He had 5 good years before he passed. "You saved him," Leia said softly. "I nearly killed a man," I replied. "A man who was torturing an animal for sport," she countered, meeting my eyes. "What you did might not have been right, but I understand it. The guilt you still carry says more about you than the fight ever could. Most people who judge you just weren't there to see what he did." "I don't feel what you feel." Leia gently took his hand, her warmth a stark contrast to his calloused skin. "You are not a monster, Ethan. You are a man who fights so hard against suffering that you sometimes lose your way." He stared at their hands, shocked that she could know his darkest secret and still stay. "I scare myself," he admitted, his voice low. "The anger in me. It's a beast. What if the walls I built just crumble one day?" "Then you let folks help you build them back up." She squeezed his hand. "You do not have to carry this all on your own. I've been alone with it for 3 years. I'm used to it. Being used to a thing does not make it right." She offered that brilliant, warm smile. "Come on, sit with me. Let us talk about something else for a bit." They sat by the creek, and he felt himself unwind as she asked about his horses. He spoke of Ash and the other 3, their quirks and spirits. She listened, truly listened. "You love them," she said. "They are honest creatures." "Unlike people," he muttered. "Unlike most," Ethan corrected, looking at her. "You are different. You mean what you say." Leia's laugh was a bright sound. "Oh, I play games, just not with a person's heart." After a comfortable silence, she asked, "Can I ask you something?" He just smiled. "Why did you really come to the dance? You didn't have to." He owed her the truth. "Because I could not stop thinking about you. Ever since that storm, you have been on my mind. The way you made my cabin feel like a home." He pulled his hand back. "This is foolish. We barely know one another." "Time is not the only way to measure a connection," Leia said softly. "Sometimes you meet someone, and it is like finding a piece of yourself you never knew was lost. Is that what this is for you?" "I think it might be." She turned to him, her gaze serious. "I know this is fast, Ethan, but I have never wanted to understand someone the way I want to understand you." "What if there is nothing worth finding behind these walls?" "There is," she insisted. "I have already seen it." She reached for his hand again, and this time he let her take it. "The question is, will you let me see more?" The sound of approaching horses cut through the moment. 3 riders appeared, led by James Monroe. His face was a storm cloud. "Leia, get on your horse, now." "Uncle James, we were just talking." "I said get on your horse." Ethan stood, placing himself between them. "She has done nothing wrong." "You do not tell me about my own niece," Monroe snapped, stalking closer. "I told you to stay away from her. You said a lot of things. That does not make them true." "Fair?" Monroe's laugh was ugly. "You want fair? Is it fair that my family's name gets dragged through the mud because she is mixed up with drifter trash?" "That is enough, Uncle James." Leia's voice flashed with anger. "Ethan is not trash, and I am not a child. You live under my roof. Then maybe it is time I found my own." The words surprised them all. "I am grateful for what you have done, but that does not give you the right to control my life. I care about Ethan. I am not going to stop seeing him because you disapprove." The words hung in the air. She had said it right in front of him, Consequences be damned. Laya, do not, he urged quietly. This is not worth losing your family. You are worth it, she said, her eyes locked on his. Do you not see that? You are worth fighting for. Monroe made a noise of pure disgust. This is what happens. They always choose wrong. He pointed a finger at Ethan. That man is broken goods. He will hurt you, Laya. Eventually his temper will find you. He will not, Laya said with total faith. How can you know that? Because I have seen his kindness. I have seen the guilt he carries from one bad moment. She faced her uncle. You judge him by his worst day. I choose to see all the good ones, too. Monroe dismissed his ranch hands, his voice dropping low once they were gone. You have no idea the risk you are taking. His past will follow him, and it will follow you. I can handle gossip. Can you handle violence? Because that is what he is. Stop talking about me like I am not right here. Ethan's own anger finally broke free. You call me violent? Fine. The rage inside me scares me more than it will ever scare you. But I have spent 3 years learning to control it. I am not the man I was. Once a violent man, always a violent man. Then what does that make you? Ethan stepped forward. You stand here threatening me, trying to bully your own niece. You tell me, Monroe, how is that different from what I did? You just use words and money instead of your fists. Monroe's jaw tightened. I am protecting my family. You are controlling them. There is a difference. For a long moment they faced off. Then Monroe's expression softened as he looked at Laya. I promised your mother I would keep you safe. He gestured at Ethan. This is not safe. Love never is, she answered gently. But a life lived in fear is not a life at all. Love? You think you love him after a few days? I think I could, given the chance. Laya's hand found Ethan's again. And I want that chance, Uncle James. Monroe looked from one to the other, his face a mess of emotions. He finally shook his head and locked his eyes on Ethan. If I cannot stop her, I will give you a warning. You hurt her in any way, for any reason, and you will answer to me. Your uncle warned me. I have the money and influence to ruin you. You'll wish you were never born. I looked him straight in the eye and said, I understand. But you need to understand I would never hurt her. If I did, you wouldn't have to destroy me. I would do it myself. For a second, I saw something like respect in his eyes. He told Laya to be careful and rode off, leaving us in the quiet. Well, that went well, Laya said, and the sarcasm made me laugh out loud, which surprised us both. You are insane, I told her. Probably, she grinned. But you laughed. We just stood there smiling at each other. Something inside me started to give way, some old fear loosening its grip. I had to ask her, did you mean what you told your uncle about caring for me? Every word, she said, stepping closer. I know this is fast and maybe foolish, but I care about you. I want to see where this could go. Fear held me back, the fear of proving her uncle right. I am not good at this, was all I could say. I told her I was no good at letting people in, at trusting. I know, she said, placing her hand on my chest. I'm just asking you to try. One day at a time. Her touch felt like a brand. I covered her hand with mine. What if I disappoint you? I asked. And what if you do not? She answered with a smile. Before I could respond, the first snowflake fell. We both looked up as the sky turned gray and more flakes drifted down. Snow? In October? Laya whispered. A knot formed in my stomach. An early snow meant a hard winter was coming and the passes would close soon. You need to get back to your uncle's ranch. This could get bad. Come with me, she offered. Your uncle just threatened my existence. Showing up at his ranch is not going to help. I started moving toward the horses. But Laya stood her ground, snowflakes in her hair. Promise me, she said, that you will not use this as an excuse to hide away and push me out. I could not make a promise I was not sure I could keep. I will try, I said. That is all I can offer. Then I will take it. To her horse, got on, and looked down at him. When the snow lets up, you come find me. Promise me, Ethan. Just promise you'll come. He nodded. I promise. A beautiful smile broke through her worry. She turned her horse toward her uncle's ranch and rode off until the blizzard swallowed her whole. Ethan mounted his own horse and headed for home. The snow fell hard all night and the next day. He woke to a world buried in white and knew this winter was fixing to be a bad one. For 3 days the storm raged. When it finally broke, the world was buried under nearly 2 feet of snow. The cold was brutal, and every part of him knew travel was foolish. But he had made a promise to Leia. It took him an hour just to dig a path to the stable. His horse, Ash, fought him on it, not wanting to face the deep drifts. Ethan couldn't blame him, but a promise was a promise, and keeping this one felt more important than his own safety. The ride to the Monroe Ranch was a nightmare. The trail was gone, forcing Ethan to rely on memory. By the time he saw the house, he was half frozen and bone-tired. As he tied Ash to the post, the door swung open. James Monroe stood there holding a rifle. "What do you want here?" Monroe's voice was like ice. "I told Leia I'd come when the snow stopped." "It stopped yesterday. You took your sweet time." "The trails are barely there," Ethan said, meeting his gaze. "Is she all right?" Monroe's hard expression softened just a bit. "She's sick. Fever hit her 2 days ago." Fear shot through Ethan. "She keeps asking for you," Monroe continued, lowering the rifle. "Says she needs to tell you something important. Now, I don't like you, Cole. Don't trust you one bit. But my niece needs you. So you can come in. But you cause one lick of trouble, and I'll throw you out myself. Understand?" Understood. Monroe led him inside, where the warmth from the fireplaces felt like a burn on his frozen skin. They went upstairs, and Monroe stopped at a closed door. "My wife, Helen, is in there with her." He gave Ethan a long look. "She really cares about you. I can't for the life of me figure out why." "Neither can I," Ethan admitted honestly. "Well, you ought to figure it out, because that woman in there deserves a man who's as sure as she is." Monroe knocked and went inside, leaving Ethan in the hall. A moment later, his wife, a kind-faced woman, came out. "Mr. Cole, I'm Helen. Leia's been waiting for you. You have 10 minutes. Ethan entered the room. Leia was propped up in bed, flushed with fever, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "You came," she whispered. "I promised," he said, taking a seat beside her. "Your uncle said you had something important to tell me." She nodded, her grip weak as she reached for his hand. "This winter, it's going to be a bad one. When I'm better, I'm coming to your cabin. I'm staying with you." Ethan was speechless. "You can't. Your uncle—" "My uncle doesn't decide for me. I do," she said, her eyes fierce despite the fever. "I'm done letting other people run my life. I've learned that life is too short to live by someone else's rules." "I care about you, Ethan," she said, pulling his hand to her chest. "More than what folks might think. I can't stand the thought of you out there all alone this winter. What if your uncle is right? What if I'm no good for you?" "Then that's a risk I'm willing to take," she said firmly. He stared at this brave woman, who was offering him everything he thought he could never have. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why risk it all for someone like me?" "Because you're worth it," she said simply. "And because I know you would do the same for me." And she was right. He would ride through any storm for her. He heard himself say, "When you're well, if you still want to come, I won't stop you." Helen returned then, her expression firm. "Time's up, Mr. Cole." Ethan stood. "Get well," he said gruffly. "I'll be back to check on you. I promise." Monroe was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "What did she say?" he demanded. Ethan looked him square in the eye. "She said she's spending the winter with me at my cabin." Monroe's face turned red. "Absolutely not. I forbid it." With all respect, sir, you can't. She's a grown woman, and it's her choice to make. Monroe's voice cut through the cold air. You care about her, do you not? Ethan paused. More than I ever thought I could. Then do right by her. Marry her, Monroe said flatly. The words hit Ethan hard. Marriage was a world away from the life he knew. I cannot, he finally managed. I have nothing. She deserves a whole lot better. What she deserves is a man who sees her worth, Monroe shot back. A man who will fight for her. She seems to think you are that man, and I am starting to trust her judgment. Ethan could only nod before stepping out into the storm. The ride home was a blur of confusion and a terrifying new hope. Laya wanted him, despite it all. The question was if he was brave enough to let her. For 6 long days, the snow just kept on falling. He spent that week wondering if Laya was watching the same blizzard, wondering if she still meant what she said. He told himself it was better if she forgot all about him. It would be safer for her that way. But he knew he was only lying to himself. He wanted her to come with a desperation that shook him to his core. On the 7th day, the sun finally broke through, turning the whole world to crystal. As he checked his horses, he heard the crunch of hooves in the snow. It was her. Laya rode toward him, bundled up but sitting tall in the saddle. She had saddlebags with her, packed full for more than just a short visit. She had truly come. He stood there, frozen somewhere between wonder and panic, as she swung down from her horse. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her breath fogging in the cold. "You should not be here," was all he could say. She just walked toward him. "Are you going to help me with my bags? Or are we going to argue out here in the freezing cold?" A small smile touched Ethan's lips as he moved to help. "Does your uncle know you're here?" he asked. "He does," she said, grabbing a smaller bag. "We had quite the talk. He does not like it one bit, but he accepts that this is my decision. He made me promise to come right back if you treat me poorly." She added, "He also sent enough supplies to feed us both all winter." Ethan saw then that her horse was loaded down heavy. She had brought flour, sugar, coffee, and all sorts of preserved food. "I may be impulsive," she said, heading for the cabin, "but I am not impractical." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ethan's face felt hot. "Laya," he started, "we need to be practical, about sleeping and all that." She stood up from the fire she'd just brought to life. "I will take the floor. You will take the bed. That is, until we both agree on something different." She looked him square in the eye. "I am not here to ruin your reputation or mine. I am just here to see if this feeling between us is real." She stepped closer, and he saw the lingering sickness in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I think it could be, Ethan. If you just give us a chance." He wanted to believe her, but old doubts were hard to shake. "I am not an easy man to live with," he said, his voice low. "Then we will learn how," Laya answered, placing her hand over his heart. "Just be honest with me. That is all I ask." She gave him a little smile. "Now, are you going to help me unpack? Or are we just going to stand here thinking of ways this could go wrong?" Something in his chest loosened. "I will help you unpack." They spent the next hour putting her things away. She had packed smart, bringing flour, sugar, and dried goods that would see them through the winter. "Where did you get all this?" he asked, looking at a fine piece of jerky. "Some from home, some I bought in town," she said, folding her clothes. "I have been planning this for a while. This was not a rash decision." Ethan shook his head. "Your uncle must have been fit to be tied." "He was," she admitted, "but he saw I was serious. He even warned me not to get hurt by you." "I know. He told me," Ethan said. Laya met his gaze. "I told him you would not hurt me. I told him I trusted you." The weight of that trust felt heavy on his shoulders. What if he is right? What if I— "Stop," she said, closing the distance between them. "I need you to stop planning for the worst before we have even begun. Can you give us a fair shot?" He looked at the grit and determination in her eyes and knew she was right. He had been so focused on avoiding pain, he had not let himself see the gift she was offering. "I can try," he finally said. "Good," she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "That is all I ask." They found a rhythm over the next few days. They were both early risers, sharing coffee before chores. Laya took over the cooking, and Ethan found he had missed good meals more than he knew. In return, he taught her about the horses. She had a gentle, confident way with them, and they took to her right away. "This one likes you," Ethan said one afternoon as she brushed Ash's coat. "How can you tell?" she asked. "His ears," Ethan explained. "They are relaxed and pointed toward you. It means he trusts you." Laya smiled, stroking the horse's neck. "He is a beautiful animal." "He saved my life once," Ethan said quietly. "Pulled me out of a canyon just before a flash flood." He started checking another horse's hooves. "Horses are like that. You take care of them, they take care of you." "Is that how you see all relationships?" she asked softly. "I would not know," he replied. "Have not had enough to say." "Tell me about your family," Laya said, changing the subject. "You know all about mine, but you never talk about yours." Ethan paused his work. He knew this talk was coming. "Not much to tell," he said, keeping his eyes on the horse's hoof. "My father died in a drinking accident when I was a boy. My mother got sick when I was 17. It was quick, like your mother's. 3 days and she was gone." "I am so sorry," Laya said. "It was a long time ago." "Time does not erase grief. It just changes it," she said, moving closer. "What did you do after she died?" "I worked on ranches, learned about horses. I learned to keep to myself because people always leave in the end." "That sounds like a lonely life." "It is a safe one," he countered. "Safety is not the same as happiness, Ethan." He finally looked up at her. And in that quiet moment, something unspoken passed between them. She reached out, her fingers gentle on his rough cheek. "Thank you for letting me in, even just a little." Before he could answer, a blast of wind hit the barn. Snow began to fall, thick and heavy. "We had better get inside," Ethan said. "This looks to be a bad one." The storm howled for 3 full days. They stayed warm inside the cabin with Laya reading aloud from one of her books. Her voice filled the quiet space, making it feel less empty. Ethan mended harnesses, his hands busy, but his mind was on the woman across the room. She had not changed a thing, but the whole cabin felt warmer, fuller, like a house that was finally a home. "What are you thinking about?" Laya asked, looking up from her book. "How different it feels," he admitted, "with you here." "Good different or bad different?" "Just different," he said honestly. She smiled at that. When the storm finally broke, they were completely snowed in. Drifts were piled high against the windows. "We are going to have to dig our way out," Ethan said. "Then we dig," Laya replied, already pulling on her coat. They worked for hours, shoveling side by side, clearing paths in the deep snow. It was hard work, but they fell into an easy rhythm. That night, by the fire, Ethan watched her read. Her hair shone in the lamplight. She looked so at peace, so perfectly in place. He realized then that she belonged there, in his cabin, in his life, and she kept her word. Laya's presence filled the cabin, chasing away the lonely silence he was so used to. The feeling should have been unnerving. Instead, it was a comfort, like a warm blanket on a cold night. "Laya," he said one evening, "I'm glad you're here." Her smile lit up the entire room. "I'm glad I'm here too." The days turned into weeks. The snow kept falling, trapping them there together until spring. But it wasn't a trap. It was a strange kind of peace. Laya was easy to live with, respecting his quiet moods and filling the evenings with good conversation. Slowly, she was teaching him how to not be alone. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said one night by the fire. He thought for a moment, then decided on the truth. "I used to write poetry." he said quietly. Back when I was a boy, before my mother passed. It was terrible stuff, but it was a way to get the feelings out. Her eyes went wide. Really? Do you still write? No, he said, haven't in years. Haven't in seemed like a foolish thing to do, model. She thought writing my feelings down was brave. What did you write about? She asked. The land, mostly. How the mountains look at sunrise, things that made me feel small and large at the same time. That is beautiful, Leia said. It is embarrassing. No, she insisted. It is honest, and that is never embarrassing. Her conviction cracked something open inside me. You see the good in everything, do not you? I see the truth, she said, taking my hand. And I see you, Ethan Cole. All of you. What if I am just pretending to be better than I am? I asked. Then you are the most dedicated pretender I have ever met, she said, squeezing my hand. You are who you are. Wounded and trying to protect yourself, but also kind and gentle. I see it in how you treat your horses. I see it in how you have made room for me in your life without complaint. And I see how you look at me when you think I am not watching. My breath caught. You are precious, I said, my voice rough. And I am afraid I will ruin you and prove everyone right about me. Let me tell you about yourself, Ethan. Leia knelt down in front of him, taking his hands in hers. You give your own bed to a stranger. You ride through a blizzard just to check on someone who is sick. You feel things so deep you had to build fences around your heart just to survive. You are not a monster. You are just a man who is trying not to get hurt again. He fought back tears. I do not know how to be the man you need. You already are, she said. Just by being honest with me, you are everything I need. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight like she was the only real thing in the world. She fit perfectly, her head right under his chin. They stood there for a long time, listening to the fire and the wind. I care about you, Ethan whispered into her hair. More than I thought I could. And it scares me to death. I know, she said into his chest. But it does not have to be scary. It can be a fine thing, too. Then teach me. She pulled back to look at him. I cannot teach you that, Ethan. It is something we have to learn together, one day at a time. And I promise you, it will be worth it. Then she gave him a soft, sweet kiss full of hope. And holding Leia with the winter storm raging outside, Ethan finally let himself believe he might deserve this. He might deserve her. When they parted, Leia smiled with a warmth that made his heart ache. See, she said softly, a fine thing. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ethan gave a real smile back. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with emotion, a fine thing. Outside, the storm carried on. But inside that little cabin, something warm and precious was starting to grow. It felt a whole lot like hope. They still slept apart that night, her in the bed and him on his pallet. But there was a new understanding between them, something real and worth protecting. The morning came, with bright sun shining on a world of snow. Ethan found Leia already at the window holding her coffee. It is beautiful, she said, not even turning around. I have never seen anything like it. Ethan joined her, taking the cup she had poured for him. The snow outside sparkled like a field of diamonds. It will not last, he said. It will all turn to mud soon enough. But right now, it is perfect. She looked at him and smiled. And that is enough, is it not? He knew she was not just talking about the snow. Yeah, he said. I am starting to think it is. They stood together, quiet and comfortable, watching the light on the snow. It was a simple moment, but it felt like a promise of what life could be. The next few weeks settled into a peaceful rhythm. They worked side by side, taking care of the cabin and the horses. At night, they would read by the fire. Slowly, Ethan started to let his fences down. He even told her about the poetry he used to write. One night she talked him into trying again. He found words for the snow on the pine trees and for the deep, quiet winter. "That is beautiful," she said when he was done. "You have a gift. They are just words." "Words are how we show people what is inside our hearts," she said, taking his hand. "Thank you for sharing yours with me." But it was not always easy. Some days his old habits returned. He would build his walls back up and push Leia away with a sharp word or a cold shoulder. The first time, Leia called him on it. "You are doing it again," she said plainly. "You are retreating. Tell me what is wrong." Ethan wanted to deny it, but he had promised to be honest. "I do not know," he said. "I just feel trapped." "Not by you," he added quickly. "By being afraid this good thing will not last," Leia finished for him. She saw right through him. "I am not going anywhere, Ethan. You have to stop pushing me away just because things are good. You have to let yourself believe this is real." "I do not know how," he admitted. "Then let us figure it out together," she said. "When you feel scared, you tell me. We cannot fix a problem if I do not know it is there." It was a simple idea, but it went against every instinct he had. Still, he nodded. "I will try." And he did. The next time he felt himself shutting down, he told Leia what he was feeling. It was hard at first, but she always listened with patience. As the winter went on, the snow piled high, cutting them off from the world. But instead of feeling trapped, Ethan felt a sense of peace. One night, Leia asked him about Garrett again. "Do you regret how you stopped him?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I regret losing control," he said. "I regret the anger, but I do not regret saving that horse. And I do not regret making Garrett think twice before hurting another animal." "Would you do it differently?" she asked. "I would like to think so. But in that moment, seeing that horse in pain, I am not sure I could have." He looked her in the eye. "Does that scare you?" "No," she said softly, "because you are not that person anymore. You have learned to control that fire inside you," she said, moving closer. "You would still protect something helpless, but you would not destroy yourself to do it." "How can you be so sure? I have seen how gentle you are. You are not a violent man, Ethan. You are a passionate one." Her faith in him felt like a gift. He pulled her into his lap, holding her tight. "I do not deserve you." "Stop saying that," she whispered. "You deserve everything I am choosing to give." In that quiet moment, he realized he did not just want her there. He needed her. He needed her warmth and her belief in him. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. "Leia," he said against her hair, "I love you." She pulled back, her eyes shining. "Say that again." "I love you," he repeated, and it was easier this time. "You changed everything for me." A tear rolled down her cheek, but she was smiling. "I love you too. So much it scares me." "Good," he grinned. "Then we are both terrified together." She laughed and kissed him. This kiss felt different. It was a promise that two lonely souls had finally found their way home. Leia rested her forehead against his. "Ethan, I want to stay, not just for the winter. I want to build a life with you, if you will have me." Ethan pulled back, his eyes wide. "If I will have you?" "Leia, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. The real question is if you want this life. It is hard and isolated out here." "I would be giving up things that never made me happy," she said, cupping his face. "What I want is right here. You, this cabin, and a chance to build something real." "Your uncle will never approve." "He does not have to. I am choosing you." Ethan saw nothing but love in her eyes. "Then yes," he said. "Stay with me. Marry me." Leia's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I am asking because I want you to be my wife. Because I want to wake up every morning knowing you are home." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Yes," Leia whispered. "Yes." I will marry you. The storm raged outside, but inside they were safe. That night, for the first time, they lay together in the narrow bed, simply holding each other. The warmth from someone you loved was better than any fire. February brought a thaw, making travel possible. We have to go, Leia said one morning. My uncle will be worried sick. We need to tell him our plans. Ethan nodded reluctantly. He is not going to be happy. He will accept it when he sees how serious we are, she said with a small smile. Besides, we are almost out of coffee, and I refuse to face winter without it. The ride to her uncle's ranch took twice as long as usual. The horses moved carefully through the melting snow. Finally, the sprawling ranch house appeared with smoke rising from its chimneys. Monroe himself walked out onto the porch as they approached, his face a mask. Helen, his wife, appeared behind him, her expression softening with relief when she saw Leia. You are alive, Monroe said, his voice flat. We were starting to wonder. We are fine, Uncle James, Leia said, taking Ethan's hand. Monroe's eyes narrowed at the gesture. We need to talk to you. They gathered in his study. Helen brought them coffee, fussing over how thin Leia looked. You both look like you have been through a war, she said. Just a hard winter, Leia assured her. Once Helen left, Monroe leaned back in his chair. So, he said, his voice dripping with disapproval, you survived the winter, alone, in that cabin. We did, Leia said calmly, and we have decided to spend the rest of our lives together. Ethan has asked me to marry him, and I have accepted. The silence was heavy. Monroe's face shifted from surprise to anger, then finally landed on grudging acceptance. You are serious about this, he stated. Completely, Ethan replied. Sir, I know I am not what you wanted for her. I have no wealth to offer. But I love her, and I will spend my life making sure she never regrets this choice. Monroe looked at his niece. And you are certain you understand what you are giving up? I understand perfectly. Leia's voice was firm. I am choosing this life with this man because he makes me happy. I love him, Uncle James. I need you to accept that. Monroe sighed, looking suddenly older. Your mother wanted you to marry well, to have security. My mother wanted me to be happy, Leia corrected gently. And I am. If you hurt her, Monroe said, looking straight at Ethan, you will have me to answer to. I will not, Ethan said, his gaze steady. That is all anyone can promise, Helen said from the doorway. She had been listening the whole time. James, they love each other. Can you not see that? Let them be happy. Monroe stood and walked to the window. Your mother was my baby sister, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I swore I would take care of you. Maybe I focused so much on keeping you safe. I forgot you needed to live your own life. Uncle James, Leia started, but he held up a hand. I still think you are rough around the edges, Monroe said to Ethan. I still think my niece deserves better, but I see how she looks at you, and I remember feeling that way about Helen. He glanced at his wife, who smiled warmly. So, if this is what makes her happy, I will accept it. Leia rushed across the room and hugged her uncle tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Monroe cleared his throat. Well, if you are going to do this, you will do it properly. A real wedding. Actually, Ethan said, we were thinking of something small, in town. Absolutely not, Helen said firmly. You are joining this family, and we will celebrate it. Nothing fancy, she added, seeing Leia's look. Just family and friends, right here at the ranch. Leia looked at Ethan. Whatever you want, he said softly. As long as you end up my wife. Nothing else matters. Then a small gathering here sounds perfect, Leia said, her eyes shining. Monroe stopped them as they were fixing to leave. My foreman's heading back east come spring, he told Ethan. I need a man who knows this land and can handle my crew. The job's yours if you want it. Good pay, a house for you and Leia, a real future. Leia went still beside him. It was a fine offer, but it meant giving up his own place, the first thing he'd ever called his. "I thank you," Ethan said, choosing his words with care. "But I cannot give up my cabin." Monroe just nodded. "I understand. But I could still use your help with some tough horses, part-time." "On my own terms," Ethan replied. "Would not have it any other way," Monroe said. "I need a partner, not an employee." They shook on it. That night, sitting at Monroe's table, Ethan felt like he finally belonged. Helen kept piling food on their plates, asking about their plans for the little cabin. "It needs some work," Leia admitted. "A bit more room for when we—" Helen finished for her with a smile, "for when you have children." Monroe grumbled that he was already planning to send some men to help. "Cannot have my niece living in a shack," he said. Leia insisted she only needed Ethan, but Ethan saw the wisdom in it. Accepting help was not weakness, it was building a family. "We'd appreciate the help come spring," he finally said. 3 weeks later, they were married. The world outside was all mud from the melting snow, but inside Monroe's house, it was beautiful. Ethan watched Leia walk down the stairs in a simple white dress, and her smile was brighter than any sunrise. A traveling minister performed the short ceremony. As Ethan put the gold ring on her finger, his hands trembled. His voice was thick with emotion as he promised to choose her every single day. Her vows were just as heartfelt, and soon enough there was not a dry eye in the house, not even Monroe's. The party was a happy affair, and for the first time the ranch hands treated Ethan like one of their own. All he could do was look at Leia, his wife, and wonder how he got so lucky. As they were leaving, Monroe pulled him aside. "I was wrong about you," he said plainly. "I judged you on your past, and for that I am sorry. You take care of my niece." Ethan shook his hand. "Every day for the rest of my life," he promised. The ride back to their cabin was quiet and full of peace. When they got there, Ethan helped Leia from her horse. But instead of going inside, he just looked at their little home. "It is going to be a good life," he said. "Hard, but good." Leia took his hand. "Ours." Standing there, Ethan felt a deep peace, knowing he was right where he belonged. Spring finally came, and with it, Monroe's ranch hands. Ethan worked alongside them to expand the cabin, surprised to find he enjoyed the company. The men respected him, and friendship started to grow. Leia brought the inside to life, planting a garden and filling the space with color and warmth. "We are becoming civilized," Ethan joked one day. "We are becoming a home," she corrected him. And he knew she was right. It was more than a shelter now. He even started writing his poetry again, inspired by the life they were building. He wrote about Leia, about their garden, about the miracle of being loved. Then in May, they got news that changed everything. A baby was on the way. The thought filled Ethan with both fear and happiness. "I do not know the first thing about being a father," he told her that night. "Neither of us knows," she said softly, "but we will learn together." Even Monroe cracked a real smile when he heard and made sure the new room was finished by June. That summer, Ethan found his calling working with troubled horses. His reputation grew, and other ranchers started paying for his help. "You are making a good name for yourself," Leia told him one night. "Because you gave me a life worth building," he answered. By August, he could see their baby growing. He would watch Leia sleep, amazed by the life they had created together. The past has a way of riding back into town when you least expect it. For Ethan, it showed up with news that made his blood run cold. Garrett was back. The man he had beaten within an inch of his life 3 years ago. Leia, with their child on the way, stood right by him. "We face this together," she said, leaving no room for argument. So they rode to the saloon, every step heavy with worry. They found Garrett looking older and carrying a limp. He didn't waste any time. "I came to apologize," he said, and the words hung in the dusty air. Ethan just stared, trying to make sense of it all. He had been so sure this was a fight, but maybe it was something else entirely. Garrett confessed he had had 3 long years to think. He knew what he did to that horse was cruel and wrong. "You stopped me," Garrett admitted, "and you taught me a lesson I needed to learn." Ethan quietly said that what he did was also inexcusable. "No," Garrett said, shaking his head. "It was understandable." He just wanted to clear the air, to let Ethan move on without that shadow hanging over him. With a simple handshake, a weight Ethan had carried for years finally lifted. Before leaving, Garrett tipped his hat to Leia. "Ma'am, you've got a good man there." After he left, Ethan felt the relief wash over him, clean and new. In that quiet moment, Leia asked if he could finally forgive himself. Thinking of the angry man he used to be and the loving husband he was now, Ethan knew the answer. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think I can." Winter arrived, but this time they were prepared. On a cold January night, as snow blanketed the world outside, their new life began. After 12 terrifying hours, Ethan heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the cry of his child. He walked into the room to see Leia, exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny bundle. "Come meet your daughter," she whispered. As he took the small, warm baby in his arms, he knew he was finally free. The past was just a story, and his future was sound asleep in his arms. All the walls Ethan had built around his heart came tumbling down for good. Leia looked at him holding their little girl and asked, "What should we name her?" He looked at his daughter, then his wife, and the life they'd made from nothing but grit and hope. "Joy," he said, "because that is what you both are." That spring, life bloomed all around them. Their garden grew, and little Joy grew right along with it, happy and curious. Folks from the ranch, like Monroe and Helen, started coming around, treating them like family. Ethan's name as a horseman spread, and he finally felt like he belonged. Then one afternoon, Monroe rode up looking serious. "Cole, we need to talk." "I'm getting older," Monroe said, straight to the point. "This ranch is too much for one man. I want to make you a full partner. Your name on the deed, right next to mine." Ethan was speechless. Monroe told him he was family now and the best horseman he knew. He said the ranch needed someone he could trust to carry it on. Monroe handed him a document. "Talk it over with Leia. But no, this is what I want." That night, Ethan told Leia about the offer. "What do you want to do?" she asked him softly. "I think it is time to stop being afraid," he said. "He is offering us a future. I would be a fool to say no." Leia smiled. "You are not that scared man anymore." "You helped me become this man," Ethan told her, pulling her close. "Then you go on and accept," she said. "Build that legacy for our family." As they sat under the stars, he knew their future was solid, something they would build together. He saw clouds gathering far off over the mountains, but for the first time a coming storm did not make him want to run. He had learned that a woman who laughs in the rain can teach a man who never smiled how to find joy, and that real love was worth every single risk. Inside, Joy started to fuss. He followed Leia into the warm light of their home, a true, genuine smile finally on his face. The cowboy who never smiled had learned how. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.